hopefully this comes through in the podcast is that this is like we're talking about the human condition. We might be focused on certain aspects of it or certain diagnoses but this like human condition, this human species that we're all a part of. So these are sometimes more specific and more related to certain people, but we can also look at like how this generalizes.
Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Dave. It's been 2 weeks. We didn't release anything last week. That is a first for us. We went 48 weeks recording and releasing.
I know it felt weird. I was just it was almost like I was missing a part of me. I'm like, what is going on? So happy to be back, and hopefully we didn't piss too many people off by missing a week, but life is happening, and I think you were on your spring break in Ontario. Yep. So and we didn't have a lot. We're still trying to catch up and maybe create a bit of a bank of recordings, and we haven't been able to do that. So this is what we decided to take care of ourselves a little bit and not push things into evenings or weekends. So
exactly. So no, it was weird not to release anything, but hopefully we have a bank of episodes that people can listen to and didn't miss us too much. And yes, it was our March break here for students. Not so much spring, it was still cold, but it was a nice week to have off nonetheless.
Yeah, and actually in between the time I was back home for a wedding. So shout out to some of our biggest fans and listeners. I ran into a lot of people that I haven't seen for a while, and the podcast came up quite a bit. So I heard people, like you said, they're looking through the bank and finding topics that interest them, and I think that's kind of neat that we have enough recordings now that people can find things that they're interested in and share it with people that they think might benefit from it or be interested in it. So yeah.
It's fun, right? I think over the break I sent you an email about just, someone I knew who emailed and said, hey, like really enjoying the podcast, and this is the feedback that we're getting, and we appreciate it because we were just talking, we're not produced by anyone. We do this as volunteer work pretty much, and we really enjoy it, and it just keeps us motivated and to keep doing it.
Yeah. How about today? We're going to be focused on ASD for our last ASD specific episode. We are trying to kind of clump topics together and maybe have more of an agenda in terms of what we're focusing on. So today's our last one we're going to be looking at adolescents and adult ASD and kind of supports or treatment or interventions for this population. And also a very common kind of term that's being thrown around all over social media now is masking, and looking a bit at that and understanding what that might mean and for someone on the spectrum or people that are, know someone on the spectrum and supporting someone on the spectrum. So
yeah. And just to clarify and reinforce the idea that treatment doesn't necessarily mean a cure, because there is no cure for ASD. It's really managing our characteristics, symptoms, challenges, and how to, if possible, constantly make improvements, whether it's in our social interactions, in our behaviors, even if that means it's going to work and, amping up our functioning a little bit, so that we can get the best out of ourselves. And then when we go home, we do what we need to do to alleviate the stressors that we've had throughout the day because of ASD.
Yeah, I think, and maybe this is a bit of repeat for those that are listening to the other episodes, but the neurodiversity affirming kind of approach that's out there, or the language that is out there, it's really just recognizing that people's brains are wired a bit differently, and how do we support and accommodate and work with. I was actually listening to a podcast that is put on by individuals on the spectrum, and the whole episode was about like, how do you ask or request or demand the kind of accommodations you might need, and whether they're at work or with a friends group. One of the examples was used was one of the guys had went on a recent stag party to and traveled with 12 other or 11 other guys, and really like had to kind of disclose and say like, I can't do that, or I'm not able to do this, or do you guys mind if I do this, right? It's like asking for those accommodations. So
Yeah. Yeah. So good on that person to ask for those accommodations, right? And that's a big piece around ASD is self-advocating, right? It's a big one for even teenagers and kids too, but I would say for adults, sometimes we don't have the caregiver support anymore, or caregivers or others have sort of distanced themselves, so there's no one to really advocate for that individual anymore, and it's learning to from time to time advocate for ourselves.
absolutely. And I think about like with advocating, you need to have self understanding, you need to have, self acceptance before you're even advocating, right? So
Hmm.
sometimes a diagnosis really helps some adults
Hmm.
understand why they struggle in certain areas. And once they understand that, then they can start to ask people for accommodations, or even just disclose it to friends and family that like, you know, I actually I actually can't do this, that this is really hard on me. And actually, this brings up masking. Let's dive into masking, because this is exactly what we're talking about. So the effort it takes to fit in and present a certain way. And I think in general, in society, we kind of have these unspoken or spoken judgments about what's right and what's wrong. And a lot of adults and adolescents, especially adolescents, just think about junior high for anyone,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like trying to fit in, what's cool, what's not cool, right? So again, who you are, and then who you project or who you
Hmm.
pretend or who you try to be, if there's a lot of overlap with that, you're going to have less stress. If
Hmm.
you're trying to be someone very different than who you are, then you're going to have a lot of stress. And so this idea of masking is like presenting a certain way. And I heard it said on that podcast, like the mask can depend on who is looking at the mask, right? So you might have different masks for different social groups.
Yep, you might have a mask for work, you might have a mask for going out with a small group of friends. You might have a mask with extended family. Funny enough, though, oftentimes that mask comes off with closer family members. Right.
Mhm.
So, it's going home and just being able to be you and retiring to your room, not speaking to your family very much or your loved ones very much at home. But when you go out there, it's like taking a lot of energy to socialize, quote unquote, like everyone else, whether it's to get on public transit and not stim or have certain repetitive movements. Like that takes a lot of energy, right?
Mhm.
And I have had clients who will tell me that they've had to practice this in front of a mirror, to greet at an interview, shake hands and having a checklist, like remember to do this and this and this and this.
Mhm.
Where again, for you and I, Dave, like that might be really natural. Like we enter a room, somebody new, we smile, we shake hands, and we say, "Hey, how's it going? My name is Andrew," and then we get off on a conversation. But it's very different for the person who's on the spectrum.
For sure. And I think, like, again, it's efforting. Like, how much effort does it take to do that, to kind of fit in? So when even like kids with ADHD, right? If they're shaking their leg or they're moving a lot and they get told like, stop doing that, right?
Hmm.
So the effort it takes to like, okay, I know that's bad. I learned, someone told me to stop doing this thing that I was doing because it felt good. Like there was no
Hmm.
other reason for like other than that's just who they are. They're hyperactive or they're busybody, right? And
Yep.
so efforting to stop doing something to be able to accommodate the needs or the preferences of other people around you.
Yeah. The analogy I like to use is like your automobiles or your car's gas tank, right? You start the day full and then you go to work and you're burning that fuel, right?
Hmm.
Now, the rate at which you're burning is way faster than, let's say, the neurotypical person, right? So the neurotypical person, they're burning at a much slower rate. But let's say by the time you get home, your fuel tank is close to empty, right? Whereas the neurotypical person going home, they're maybe still at half a tank, right? And so, in terms of even sometimes their patience level, their tolerance for certain things, for the person who's on the spectrum, who's burned through that fuel tank all day, little things can now spark them, right? And this
Hmm.
is a very similar analogy I'll use with kids as well, right? You go to school, you burn through that fuel tank, and by the end, you're done. Right. And so that ability to mask, like it takes effort and energy. Even it's funny because I work with some young adults who are either in college or university. 9 times out of 10, if they are on the spectrum, they are choosing programs like accounting, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Research
Yeah.
based programs, PhDs perhaps, but their characteristics sort of lend to these
Hmm.
particular roles.
Absolutely. Right. Like, I think the older they get, right, the more autonomy and control they can have in their environment.
Yep.
And so you can either work really hard to fit into an environment or you can change your environment that better suits your needs and preferences.
Yep.
I was even
Yep.
just looking at your screen and how bright it is over there. And I'm thinking, if if bright lights hurt your eyes, but it doesn't hurt other people's eyes, and you're in a group and no one else is bothered by it, do you squint and do you try to like not let it bother you? Or do you get some sunglasses, even though no one else is wearing sunglasses, maybe even indoors? Those are the kind of like accommodations that might be best for an individual, but might make them stand out or feel
Yeah.
different or feel bad. Like I think this
Yeah.
like bad good category that
Yeah.
people are navigating the world looking for those cues.
Yep. Well, this is why I'm often impressed when I do hear from clients where an employer is willing to accommodate. I would say that schools, colleges, universities, they're quite good at accommodating nowadays. I don't know what it's like in Alberta, but here in Ontario, they're pretty good. I do think that employers, for the most part, are still lagging behind. And that's why when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, my employer would like a letter," or they want like just a really short summary of accommodations that I may need, they're willing to help me out. I'm always impressed by that. So it might be like dimmer space, or maybe even if they're working in a cubicle, it's a cubicle that's more so off in the corner rather than in the middle of the office space, or even accommodating some work from home. I know that's been a bit of a point of contention nowadays with people going back to the office or ordered to go back to the office. But I'm always impressed by employers who are willing to do that.
Well, the other side to it is like employers are legally required to accommodate disability. So if you have a formal diagnosis, your employer is legally required to make reasonable accommodations.
Reasonable, yes, but I've come across employers who have given clients a really hard time nonetheless.
Oh, again, if it makes things harder for an employer, this is, you're going to be going against the grain, and it's not always like I know adults that are diagnosed that will not disclose because it isn't safe enough to disclose their disorder or
Mm.
their disability. And so they're making a calculation like, are these accommodations going to be worth the challenge that it's going to bring up with my supervisor or my employer?
It does take a lot of effort, and I really hope that in due time, more employers understand the needs of neurodivergent individuals because they are very productive and valued individuals in the workforce.
Oh, everyone has strengths and weaknesses,
Yep.
right? Like, and so I think there's actually an organization in Edmonton here that helps find employment for individuals on the spectrum, right?
Yep.
And having that be able to like support someone to find a workplace that will work good for
Yep.
them or good enough for them, and then also work with employers that are receptive to that. And yeah, so it might mean less group work or less social interaction
Yep.
and more, task-based things that the individuals can do really well and really contribute to a place of employment or school.
Yeah. Courier services, from what I've heard, at least here, they will hire individuals on the spectrum, give them a set of headphones if it's loud in there, because
Mhm.
they can be, some of them can be really good at
Mhm.
sorting, right?
Yeah.
So that's really neat to know about that.
I think this was in the news at some point, but it was like a car wash detailing shop
Hmm.
that, so being able to, and they were highly sought after individuals that were attention to detail and could do the task, like
Yeah.
really well and did not get sidetracked by talking to other people, right? Like
Yeah.
they were really focused on the task and great. So being able to find meaningful employment, meaningful work that I think
Yeah.
is good for everyone.
The other issue with masking too that I found as a clinician, especially when we complete assessments for adults, is if someone doesn't know that individual until they're an adult, there's a lot of suspicion. Why now? Why are you getting an assessment now? For as long as I've known you, things seem to be fine. Like, what do you mean you're on the spectrum? Right. So there's
Hmm.
doubt, there's suspicion. And I think sometimes hearing the stories of that idea of masking, right? Just all the frustration that sort of comes out in the assessment office or in the therapy office of how all these years they felt different,
Hmm.
that they've had to act differently, that they couldn't just be themselves. I think it's so pronounced, and it's not until we're able to talk to the caregivers and going back to, completing a good ASD assessment, you do need that childhood perspective, right? And then you hear from the parents, oh yeah, like back in kindergarten or grade one, they had such big difficulties, right? And it wasn't until maybe grade nine or grade 10 that they started just to mature out of it. But it wasn't so much maturing out of it, right? It was that they were finding strategies for themselves. And again, these are individuals who are higher functioning, became more self-aware that, hey, if I want to fit in, I better act differently, even though it doesn't come naturally to me.
If I want to fit in or if I don't want to stand out.
Yep.
Right. And so,
Yep.
oh, I'm going to learn to nod my head when someone's talking and look at them in the eyes and smile. And
Yep.
like, it's like these strategies, but again, they're effortful. They're not kind of a natural thing. And
Yeah.
so I often,
Yeah.
there was someone that I saw for a while that would say like, just read the room. Right. Well, reading the room can be really hard for some people. Right. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just think like some things are going to be easier for people and some things are going to be harder. And once you have a diagnosis, it kind of gives you a bit of a map. It's like, oh, this situation that's coming up, whether it's Christmas or a work event or going to the mall or traveling, they're like it's
Yeah.
an invisible disability, right? And
Yes.
so people are not going to see it because you're not in a wheelchair. Right. So then again, getting accommodations, you might have to actually tell people something and they might be suspicious. Like,
Yes.
really? Do you really need this accommodation? Or are you just like asking for something because, and like, shouldn't everyone get the same treatment? Right.
Well, you bring up parties, right? Like going to holiday parties or office parties. Again, just working with adults who are on the spectrum, many will complain or not want to go to those, right? Like it's going to a convention or something, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's going to be so many people. I have to make so much conversation. I hate these things, right? And so when they do go out to conventions or parties, oftentimes they're the quieter ones. They want to just sort of stand out of the crowd. And then when they do have to make conversation, so many times I've heard, I don't know how to start a conversation. And on top of that, I don't know how to maintain a conversation, right? It's so awkward to have to like keep a conversation going. I can only say so much about myself. And so this now reaches the social skills piece, right? And how we
Hmm.
work with adults who require some of that coaching or guidance.
Yeah. And those who've listened to the other episodes, you'll remember it's, the two big categories is social skills, social reciprocity, and like sensory needs, right? And
Yeah.
behavioral aspects. So looking for accommodations in both those areas. Actually, I think about just to relate to the general population, this idea of masking, you could look at it like there's a term, social impression management, right? And to what degree do we manage our impression to other people? And think about, again, junior high growing up. If you're an adult listening to this, how many times did you go out or play on a sports team or do something with other people and you were really studying like what do I need to do to have friends? What do I need to do to be cool or to attract a partner or get a relationship, right?
Yeah.
We all do this to some degree,
Yeah.
but again, the amount of effort it takes some people is going to be monumental compared to other people.
And it's so interesting because, that you use the word monumental and it really is. It drains people. They can only be there for a certain amount of time. So again, going back to the self-advocacy, it's saying, you know what, I'm here just for an hour today, and then I gotta head off to somewhere else, right? The other piece too, I always remind individuals that, hey, people are interested in talking about themselves. So individuals on the spectrum, I've always found they like talking about, well, I don't know if they like talking about themselves, but they feel like they need to talk about themselves to make conversation. And one of the key strategies I always teach is to pick up on a word that someone says and throw a question back at them. Right now, this does require active listening, something that, I mean, you and I have been taught, since the beginning of our program. You have to be an active listener, you have to pay attention, but it's being able to pick up, oh, he said the word hockey and he's talking about hockey. And it's being able to sometimes generate a question on the spot. Hey, why do you like hockey? Right. So extending conversations, not about themselves, but being able to ask a question, let the other person talk. Like most people do like talking about themselves. So just let the other person talk and throw questions back at them when they can.
Well, I'm chuckling because I think, my limited experience with, some adults on the spectrum is that they're just like, why would I do that? Why do I want to ask people questions about things I don't care about? Like if like if they like playing hockey, ask them about hockey. Well, why? I don't care about hockey, right? And in some ways that's true. Like why would
Yeah.
we talk about things we're not interested in? Well, we're doing this to build relationships, right?
Yes. Yes.
Someone is going to feel good talking about what they're passionate about, and so we're going to intentionally do that so other person feels good, and then maybe we'll also feel good, or maybe they'll like us more.
And so they may come back and say, well, why do I want to build a relationship? Right. But remember what the presenting issue was to begin with is like you're telling me that whether it's at the office or the office party, the convention, you want to be able to at least build a conversation so that you're not standing there awkwardly when someone says something and you're staring at them blankly. Remember that was our goal. So if we don't want to
Mhm.
be in that situation where we're staring blankly, this is what we have to do. Right? It's
Yeah.
just a social norm. And then let's say you've done this for 5 to 10 minutes and you're done. Okay, let's get an outro. Like let's get ourselves out of this situation. What can we say then? Oh, but oh, sorry, I need to use the bathroom. Right?
Mhm.
And then you get
Again,
yourself out.
we're learning and teaching, and it's like socially appropriate, right? What is socially appropriate way to leave a conversation or to leave a situation? Do you just walk away?
Yeah.
Do you say like, and so these are going to be like actually taught and learned in more of an educational way than say modeling that just is, we pick this up by being in a group of people and we know what the norms are because we're attuned to it, and it's easier for some people to pick those unspoken rules up.
Yeah. Actually, I love this work because when you role play, it's a lot of fun. I know some people cringe at role play,
Yeah.
but sometimes I'll just start a session by saying, you know what, we're gonna do what we talked about last time, and we're just gonna have a conversation, right? And sometimes midway through just a short conversation, you see that the person's just sort of, the client has just sort of zoned out of it. And yeah, there's that awkward silence. And then all of a sudden they start clearing. So, oh yeah, I'm supposed to ask you a question. So it's interesting and it's fun because they're picking up the skill, but you can tell like it doesn't come naturally and it does require that practice.
And I think you learn a lot about yourself by working with people that are different from you, and this is this is why I think the neurodiversity movement is really good. I think people should feel comfortable kind of in themselves and find places in the world where they can contribute and feel good about themselves. So the more we understand that there are these differences, I think the more that we can be together as a human species on this planet. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Dave, you mentioned something interesting before we started recording. It was something called Cassandra syndrome. And it's not actually, a diagnosable disorder or disability, but I'm
Or
wondering if
even a syndrome. I'm a little bit suspect, but it sounds fancy. So
do you want to go there right now?
sure, I think it's yeah. So maybe just before we move on to Cassandra
Sure.
syndrome, this masking, and again, I want to kind of make this more generalizable, perhaps. And when we were talking earlier a little bit, it was coming up for me like people pleasing, right?
Yeah.
And so some people will come into my office and say like I'm a people pleaser, right? And what that means is they change themselves to accommodate others, and they try to sense what other people like or want, and they focus on doing that rather than what they like or want, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that can be really exhausting in the same way that we're talking about masking, neurodiverse traits. It's that same level of like exhaustion that people might feel. And maybe even I'll self-disclose this. My wife, when we were dating, she made a comment after we were at a social thing and said like, you're really different around this group, or like when you're with these people. And I didn't really recognize it, right? Like I naturally kind of like can chameleon. Like I can join groups and speak differently and act differently, and I'll fit in to, you know, various types of groups.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing that like consciously. But once it was pointed out to me, I was like, oh yeah, I do that. Right. And this is something that, why am I doing that? And how am I doing that? And am I more tired in this group of people where I'm
Yeah.
acting, in a different way? Yeah, I am. I'm actually, my battery, like, or the fuel tank, like you were saying, is a lot emptier. And just
Yes.
recognizing that can empower someone to make choices about how they spend their time.
Oh, absolutely. One of my old supervisors, when I first came into the field after grad school, Dr. Sula Homatitis, who I've referenced before, she's actually really well known in this field, and she has always said, like, we're all somewhere on the spectrum,
Mhm.
every one of us. It's just to what degree do we see it as societal, that we're meeting societal expectations and when we're not, right? So to your point, yeah, we're gonna self-adjust when we go into certain groups. Even nowadays, like sometimes I will moan and groan if I have to go into a huge party of people I don't know, because I know I'm gonna have to really turn it on. And
Mhm.
as a parent, as a practice owner, as a clinician, like I'm already tired.
Mhm.
So having to really ramp up my energy level to be a certain way in front of new people, it's exhausting.
Yeah, yeah. You're saying this, and I'm like, the other question that you can ask yourself is like, what are you hiding, and how much do you have to
Mm,
hide when you're with certain people, right?
true.
And this could be like sexual orientation. This could be a disability or a challenge that you have, or and we all do this to some degree. Like you said, we're all somewhere on this spectrum, and the more we hide, the more energy it takes. And actually, one more kind of example of that is this. I just did the men's group last night, and it was initially called Men Without Hats. This group that was already running in the city for a while. And the idea was that you could take your hat off for men that had different professions, right? Like you could take off your professional hat and all connect on a human level,
Mm,
regardless of what occupation you had. But we could almost call it men without masks now, right?
yeah,
And like, what
yeah,
does it actually look like when you show up and you're with other people and you take your mask off,
yeah,
right? And how
yeah.
safe does that feel, or how scary does that feel?
I think, Dave, that's a great analogy because, again, so many transferable skills in terms of working with different populations. Even this discussion about masks, right? Like you can generalize that to your men's group. You can generalize it to any client walking into the door, right? How much of a mask are we wearing? What's your identity? What are your values and morals?
Mm.
So for any students, grad students listening, don't think that just because you are in a practicum placement with the ASD population is and you're going to be stuck working with that population forever. You're not. You're going to develop lots of skills to work with other populations as well. Sorry, I've been on a tangent there.
That's okay. I think hopefully this comes through in the podcast, is that this is like we're talking about the human condition. We might be focused on certain aspects of it or certain diagnoses or like, but this like human condition, this human species that we're all a part of. So these are sometimes more specific and more related to certain people, but we can also look at like how this generalizes. So
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
back to Cassandra syndrome. I'm gonna find my definition of it. I'll read this off because I think I mean, it's fairly new to me. Actually, a client had pointed me in this direction and said, "This might be interesting to talk about on your podcast." And I was like, "Thank you for the suggestion." And it really does kind of tie into, well, it's specifically for the neurodiverse population. So Cassandra syndrome, or more accurately described as neurodiverse relationship distress. So there's a distress that is felt in interpersonal relationships, right? For people with either both individuals
Hmm.
in the relationship on the spectrum or one individual on the spectrum. So there's often a confusion with like gaslighting, and I think we'll talk a
Mm,
little bit about that too, but that it arises from a fundamentally different psychological mechanism and requires different therapeutic responses for differentiating between Cassandra syndrome and gaslighting. And so now I'll just say gaslighting is like this manipulation or this intention to undermine someone else's perspective or someone else's truth or belief or understanding of something. So it really is this like it's kind of it's all over the TikTok, and people are
hmm.
talking about it like, don't let people gaslight you, and this is gaslighting. But in terms of the neurodiverse population and this Cassandra syndrome, it just comes about because there's a different way of communicating or different focus in terms of what's being communicated or what's being remembered from an interaction,
Yeah.
and that it can lead to harm. It can
Yeah.
lead to someone else feeling harmed by the comments, but it's not intentional. There's no intent to hurt the other person or manipulate or undermine. Like that is not the intention. It's just the mix match of communication styles.
Yeah. Whereas gaslighting, at least the traditional sense of gaslighting is that it's intentional, right?
Yeah.
Someone is doing that to get what they want, to manipulate and so on, to make someone else just feel horribly about themselves or about what they did. So yeah, it may feel like that in relationships where one person or maybe even both individuals are neurodivergent. So it's a very interesting one because again, working with some parents now, I don't do couples counseling. I know that's your thing, Dave, but sometimes even working with parents, though, this comes up in terms of the differences in their parenting styles. Maybe one person's way more involved and the other's not. And does the person who's not so involved, do they even know? Do they recognize it? Right. So yeah, I'm interested to know what you see because you do the couples work.
Yeah, well, and again, I want to kind of break down the gaslighting part because there's a lot of talk about this, and I think it's actually misused a lot of times, especially when there are genuine differences in perspective, right? So a real extreme example of this is if someone's trying to gaslight someone else, they could like move the furniture in the house And then the other person comes in and goes like, you moved the furniture. And they're like, no, I didn't. Right. That it was always like this. And then,
Mhm.
yeah. And then the person is doubting their own perception. Right.
Yep.
And actually what we do in like group therapy is reality testing, right? We test out what
Mm.
we're perceiving and we check with other people. And that can kind of help us. That can feel affirming. It can feel validating. It's like, oh yeah, I did see that, right? That actually did happen. But with the neurodiversity and the interpersonal relationships, what happens is someone might be focused more on like the words that were said,
Mhm.
right? And someone else might be more focused on like the emotional element of it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so, in gaslighting, it's like, no, that's not true. You're probably really depressed and you misread that situation. This is actually what happened. And then the other
Yeah.
person goes, oh, maybe I didn't read that right. Okay. But with the Cassandra syndrome, oftentimes a person not on the spectrum feels like emotionally invisible
Yeah.
and like a failed attempt to connect, or there's like an argument and they're really hurt after, but the other person isn't hurt. They were just being really direct with their comments, right? They weren't trying to hurt the other person. They were just saying, no, this is what I said. I actually said this, and then you said that, and then I said this. And they have a really good recollection of the words that were spoken. And for
Yeah.
other people, if you're right brained, you're going to pick up on the context of it. And you'll be like, well, I can't remember exactly what was said, but I remember you being really mad at me. And the other person's like, I wasn't mad at you. So then you're like, we're trying to sort out reality. And the beauty of like doing couples therapy is that there's a third person in the room,
Yes.
right? That's also observing this interaction,
Being
right? And
human's
then,
fun.
Mm.
There is so much to keep track of though, right? Like being a social mammal. There's so much to keep track of because look, I think what makes this so complex as well is that we have language, right? And so between emotion and language and this idea of motivation and intention, like we are monitoring our environment all the time in order to respond and react and adapt appropriately. And when our brain is taxed, it can't do all these things efficiently, right? So then we do make errors in judgment. And again, when we go back to the neurodivergent brain, they're working overtime, right? That high
Mhm.
functioning individual in a social environment, they are working overtime to monitor themselves and the environment. And as you were talking about couples there too, it's sometimes that breakdown in communication. And one person thinks that, oh, we have to really work on this, while the other person's like, I'm fine. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is fascinating for me anyways. Like one of the things that I'm trying to teach couples when I'm working with them, and this isn't my, I picked this up from a book, but it is like pay attention to the impact over your intent. Because
Hmm.
so often we're so focused on our intent that we do not. We'll say, well, I didn't mean it like that. And we just go over and say it again, right? But if you think about someone on the spectrum, paying attention to the impact might be really difficult. Like
Yeah.
what nonverbal cues are going to help me understand the impact of what I'm saying to someone, right? So, but again, if there is a misunderstanding and that misunderstanding gets clarified
Hmm.
with the Cassandra syndrome, there's more empathy and understanding. It's like, oh, okay, now I understand why that hurt you.
Yeah.
Right? With the gaslighting, it doesn't lead to more empathy, right? And it's almost like one person tends to have the advantage,
Yes.
and so it's unequal, right?
Yes. Yes. I think a lot of that's happening in the world right now. And if we were to dive into politics, there's probably a lot of gaslighting going on.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. Well, and even like because I work with like police officers and like when you go to a scene or a crime or you show up at a file, like you're going to be taking eyewitness testimony or you're going to be asking people what they saw,
Right.
and the same event can be interpreted very differently, and different perceptions on what happened. And really, at the end of the day, we're pretty flawed, right? Like
Yeah.
we cannot. We, if we're emotional, we'll remember it a certain way. If we're not emotional, if we're focused on one aspect of it because it reminded us of something, we're going to pay more
Hmm.
attention to part of it. So when we're in a relationship, we're trying to sort out like what
Yeah.
was your perception on this? Okay, what's my perception? And can both those truths actually be valid, right? Both can be true. And how do we relate to each other about this?
So Dave, in terms of outcomes, like just anecdotally from your office, how do I word this question? How successful would you say couples are in terms of being able to learn those skills to relate to each other in a more empathic manner? Like, let's say you're starting from scratch and let's say one person may be on the spectrum or neurodivergent. Yeah, what's the outcome of that? Oftentimes when you're working with them, do they pick up? Are they motivated to improve? And does it lead to more positive outcomes? Or are there times when it's just like, this is way too tough?
Well, I think, because of one of the challenges with, being on the spectrum is that social reciprocity, it makes relationships tough to begin with, right? And so how can we make things better, right?
Hmm.
And what that might look like. Even when I'm listening to someone speak and they're speaking to their partner, I might translate for them, right? Or I
Okay.
might direct them to say, have a peek over there and look at your partner. What are you picking up? What kind of feelings do you think your partner is having right now? Right? And so what I notice is that those nonverbal cues get missed or ignored in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so someone is halfway through what they're saying, and their partner is sighing, crossing their arms, shaking their head, right? And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I want to stop right here to find out what's going on the other side, right? But
Okay.
someone else might just, I need to finish what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I get that that's important to you, right? And how do we? So oftentimes when I'm working with couples, I'm saying, let's slow this down. Let's slow this down. And if we can slow it down, then we can start to notice these things. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it hard? Yeah, it's hard. Anytime the more different people are, the harder the relationship will be as a general rule.
I think autism in itself, to me anyway, is very fascinating because this idea going back to like being social individuals, and yes, society dictates that we need to be in certain relationships or that we should want to be in certain relationships, right? And so sometimes, like, even when I see emerging adults, oh, you know what? It's time for me to have a romantic partner, right? It's like, why? It's like, well, I'm at that age, right? So it's not like the desire, but it's more so I understand that this is a life stage that I should be in a relationship, and therefore I should be in one. And so I'm going to pursue it and I'm going to model what I see in society of how people behave with someone you may be romantically interested in.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to act this way. But deep down, it's sort of like I don't know really why we act this way. I just know we're supposed to.
Hmm.
And then when they do get into the long-term relationship, I think sometimes that's where speaking, going back, like if we're gonna go full circle, that masking piece, it's like
Hmm.
when you are in a long-term relationship and you're living with someone now, that mask comes off.
Well, and then there'll be more energy for other things, right? So,
Yeah.
or you can keep the mask on and you can work really hard all the time, but you'll likely burn out. You might even have like physical symptoms like stomach issues or heart issues or like the amount of chronic stress that people can be under if they're really heavily masking. So, again, working with couples and having that understanding of each other, right? It's like when this person says things like this, they're actually not angry, right?
Hmm.
They have that pressured speech where it comes out quick and harsh, right?
Yep.
But it's not a reflection of them being angry about anything.
Yep.
So for the
Yeah.
other person in the other seat to go like, oh, like our interpretation, our assumptions, that's where if we slow things down, we can start to tease that apart and look at like, oh, so, and then, oh, well, you feel like this when that happens, right?
Yes.
And even in like, so again, I don't have a ton of experience, but my limited experience with, relationships and someone being on the spectrum, they like the other person will describe gaslighting or
Mm,
they'll describe abuse. Like this is
mm,
abusive, right? I'm like, oh, I can see it being harmful, but the intent behind the abusive or the power dynamics that happen
Yeah.
in power and coercion kind of like relationships, that is not what it is.
Yeah. The reframe is really important.
Yeah, but how do you
Yeah.
tell someone that like, I know this hurts,
Yes.
but
Yes.
and then how do
Yeah.
you help someone else take responsibility for something that is hurting someone else, but really is not their intent. It's really their way of communicating
Yeah.
that is quite harsh.
Yeah. And I've also heard from clients too, clients who are on the spectrum. It's like, I don't understand why my partner keeps asking me this question. Right. And so even that neurodivergent brain maybe may have a little bit less frustration tolerance. Right. And when they feel like they're being attacked, the anxiety or the nervousness may spike too. Right. And so your breakdown occurs much quicker because it's like, stop asking me this question. You're really frustrating me. And then it just becomes a bit of a toxic cycle where the other person thinks, well, you're just getting mad at me. You don't want to talk to me. And then my clients may be like, yeah, I don't want to talk to you right now because the question you're asking is stupid or it's irrelevant and I don't want to answer that question. But this is where working with my clients, it's like, okay, we really do have to understand the other person's perspective, right? When they're asking you a question about finances, why do you think that is? Right? Do you think it's a point of contention that they're just trying to create an argument, or are they trying to plan for the family? Right? Are they sounding accusatory,
Mhm.
or is the tone different?
Yeah. Oh man.
There's
Yeah.
so much to
I
learn.
there there is. And I just actually I want to make one more comment about when I was looking up Cassandra syndrome and how this can play out in relationships. It was, it was heavily leaning towards the individual not on the spectrum and like how they can feel unheard
Hmm.
and dismissed and hurt. And that is absolutely like true. But again, when we look at this from like an interactional pattern,
Yeah.
right? We want to validate the hurt and when someone is invalidated, that generally doesn't feel good. So if they're saying this happened and the person says that's not what really happened,
Hmm.
this is what you said. And you told me 10 years ago that when you say this, it means this. And I've learned that rule. And now you're contradicting yourself. The other person can be like, oh, now I feel crazy. I mean, like,
Yeah.
now I feel like, which is similar to gaslighting. But again, this is not, the intent is not to undermine the other person's sense of self. This is
Yeah.
like, genuinely
Yeah.
communicating what they remember and what they feel, and so their perception is really different. And how do we make sense of those different perceptions?
Well, this is why oftentimes when I get, let's say, a teenager and a parent in the same room and they're just going back and forth about the content, you said this, no, you said this,
Hmm.
I don't even entertain that. Not to say I just cut them off, but I will say, you know what, we can go like this for hours and we're not going to get anywhere. And
Hmm.
again, it's sort of the same with individuals on the spectrum. And let's say they are having some contentious issues and disagreements with the partner. It's like, yeah, we can focus on the content, but we're not going to go anywhere with that, right? How about the perspective taking piece, right? Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Why do you think your partner brought that up? What is the importance of that, right? We don't have to focus on the details of the conversation, but as the umbrella conversation, why do you think that was an important topic?
Yeah. Yeah, and even as a general rule in terms of couples counseling, like we can spend a lot of time going back and forth about what was said and how it was said and what the argument was. And sometimes that's useful. Like we will encourage someone to like, okay, well, like maybe even act it out. Like say, show me what that looked like. But then in the moment, in the session itself, you get to see the interactions that are happening, right? So
Yeah.
I care more about the interactions that are happening than the words or the facts that are being argued about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so being able to help people that way, that's why even like when I'm working with individuals and they're discussing concerns they have with their partner,
Yeah.
like maybe it'd be more efficient and easier if you were with your partner and you had these discussions in front of someone else to help you with that rather than having a one-sided conversation and I say, "Oh yeah, go and try this the next time you guys have a fight. Like
Yeah.
here's some rules on fair fighting rules." And like we could do some of that, but again, the real like the real learning happens by watching the two people interact.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Dave, I think the highlight for me in this episode, actually, as we talked more and more about this, especially going to the couple stuff and discussing the concept or idea of Cassandra syndrome, is if you're a clinician listening, take a step back if you are in couples counseling and the next time you're working with a couple, perhaps have sort of the neurodivergent or ASD cap on just to see if someone maybe, and I'm not saying diagnose, but at least have the framework of coming from that ASD lens.
Mm-hmm.
Is it truly gaslighting, or is there like a complete misrepresentation of perspectives?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the same for me. I'm just like the importance of understanding this. If you can understand neurodiversity, then you can understand the communication challenges that people have. And like not ignoring the harm that can come from that, right? Like there can be a lot of harm and we want to, a lot of times at the beginning it's like let's stop the damage. Like how do we do this? How maybe communicating through email or maybe communicating through text message
Yeah.
with just words is going to be easier, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is challenging, but it's challenging on both ends. Like if someone is not on the spectrum, they are often going to feel, like I said, kind of crazy or like hurt or
Yeah.
misunderstood. And on the other end, it's same thing. It's like, I don't understand.
I'm lost.
You told me to do this and now I'm doing it. There's like a real rules-based approach to interactions. And it's like, now I'm doing it. Well, but the context is different. So what? The rule changes in the context? Yes, the rule changes in the context. Okay. And they're like, but to have the other partner listen in and go like, oh my goodness, I didn't know they were working so hard to try to understand this how to express their concerns about unloading the dishwasher or loading the
Yeah.
dishwasher.
Yeah. You know
Right?
how we advise or suggest to clients like the whole idea of mind reading and not doing it?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you're in a couple's relationship and let's say there's a little bit of tension or disagreement and one couple says, "Oh, go do whatever you want."
Mm-hmm.
And then that couple actually goes and does whatever they want. And then the other person just gets more upset and the person goes, "Well, you told me to go do whatever I want." And I did, right? So taking things again as part of the being on the spectrum, someone may take things very literally,
Yes.
just go
Yes.
do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do anything wrong.
Yes. Like sarcasm or, I didn't mean that. That was just a phrase that I say, or like
Yeah.
this implicit versus explicit kind of communication or emotional versus logical communication. We can start to kind of, yes. So if we know people take things literally, we're going to be very careful with our words, right?
Hmm.
And maybe even ask for more clarification. What
Hmm.
did you hear me say? Okay. What does that lead to? Okay. But again, as adults, we are far into the journey of thinking we know how to communicate with people. So to
Yeah.
actually question those assumptions that have been around for a long time, I think is super important, especially if you keep coming in, you keep finding yourself in the same rut.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we could keep going, but let's, if you
Well, if
like
you
this,
go
yeah.
for it, Dave, go for it.
Okay, I'll try and then you help me out. If you like this, hit like, subscribe. Also, if you find that this is helpful to someone, you can just like share it through a text message. You can find an episode and you think about someone and you're like, oh, this is something that I think they would find interesting or beneficial. Please share it with friends, with family, with other people. This is how this thing grows. And at this point, like Andrew said at the beginning, we are producing this ourselves. Yes, we have an editor, but we are paying for that out of our own pocket. We are losing money in this venture, but we're not doing it for the money. But, if it could break even, that would be nice too. So, if you like this and you want it to keep going and you appreciate it, then doing those little things that could really help will help us. So we appreciate it. And I also I think we're going to be recording one more episode, so we know what's coming down next week. If you're interested, we're going to be looking at dreams and nightmares, and so more of a big. we're doing a big shift from ASD, and more of like a kind of a fun topic, but that comes up a lot in therapy. So this is what will be coming next week.
That was perfect, Dave. And yeah, that was another episode of Taking Good Care. Until next week, take good care.
Take care, everyone.